going to take us through a discussion on being able to add automation to your general ledger updates and create a modern process moving away from a monthly update to more of even a daily update to the GL. Michael, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thank you so much, Scott. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be showing you guys how to go through a daily general ledger automation workflow process. And what I'm going to be showing to you today is, as Scott said, more of a technical demo. As we all know, when we're going into every single business, they run their accounting group under the same rules, requirements, and guidelines, but every business is a little bit of a different flavor, so they handle all their different accounts separate, or it may be in different business logic. So we want to go for a more generalized form and show you kind of the end-to-end, what are the stepwise processes we do to automate your GL. And how we're going to do this is look at our current process, and in this case, we're using the company name of the Office Retailers. We are an online-based office furniture and retailer where we're going to be sourcing different products from manufacturers from around the nation and reselling them to our customers. Currently, we have a month-end close process that's done in Excel, and it has to be done monthly. The issue that we have here is that it takes too long for all of our accountants to do, as well as we want to have more insight into the cash movement going in and out of our accounts that are in our GL for certain daily operating expenses. And so our business has decided to take this on head-on with some daily GL automation, and Alteryx is the best tool available to do this. So go ahead and go on to the next slide, Scott. We're going to go through a couple key steps. The first thing we're going to do is going to be blending different data sources together to ensure that we have all the information needed to create this automation process. Next, we're going to apply some business logic. Then this is key for every single business, as they each have their own special logic that they calculate either revenue or maybe returns. And then we're going to output it to a specific format for ingestion into a general ledger. We're going to look at exception handling and a little bit of reconciliation, and then show how to schedule this report to run daily. So the next thing I want to show is actually in Alteryx and get you diving into the tool. Well, actually, Scott, go ahead and, okay, thank you. I'll take the ball. All right. Can you, Scott, confirm that we can see our screen here?
I've got a nice clear view of an Alteryx designer canvas in front of me right now with data prep and blend showing up here.
All right. So I want to give you guys a formal introduction to the Alteryx Designer. This is a drag and drop platform that allows you to do advanced analytics, meaning you can do everything from descriptive and diagnostic analytics up through doing anything in the predictive space, forecasting, or even prescriptive analytics. In addition, it provides the opportunity to do automation steps, as well as looking at spatial analysis or any sort of data prep blending transformation, or even reporting if you want to do PDF reporting. In addition, it's a drag and drop and code-free environment. What that means is that all of these different tools that I can select and put onto my canvas are configured in such a way that I don't need to know any coding language in order to utilize the tool. The beauty about this is that you don't have to, one, learn a new product, two, you can iterate on it fairly quickly, and three, you can hand this off very easily to other people on your team so they can do any sort of maintenance on this process. So the first thing I want to do is kind of give us a lay of the landscape. So we're office retailers. We want to automate our portion of our general ledger, but let's look at what information we have available to us. So I have a couple of different sources. The first is I have a SQL database that has some of my facts and dimensions that my company uses to make actionable data insights. One that I'll show off is the fact order table, and this is something that gives me all the orders that customers have placed to my business. So I have an order ID, date, some of the address information of my customer, as well as I can see how the customer purchased their shipping, as well as the amount of items, the total sales, discount, profitability, cost, tax, and whether or not an item was returned, and the total shipping cost. In addition, I have some other tables in here like information about the products, as well as looking at how a customer may be paid for their specific transaction. So I can see in the payment if there's a certain amount that they paid per each tender, and the tender being something of whether they paid with a Visa or MasterCard, American Express, or gift card. Because we're an online retailer, we're not taking cash. And then in addition to this, I also have return information that I get out of an Excel spreadsheet. And every time I run this analysis on the month-end close, it's a pain because I always have to take in this spreadsheet with this database and put them together, and that can just be a pain. So I want to show you how Alteryx can help solve your pain points in this, as well as automate your life. So as a way to show where we want to get to, this is an example of a general ledger update from some of our daily operating results. We have return information and the reason why a product was returned, as well as all of our sales information, how much we were spending in shipping, as well as how our different customers paid for their different products. In addition, we have a cash account, which is used for anytime we're giving back return information, and a credit card payable for whenever we're going to be using our shipping costs to offset. So I'm looking for this output at the end of my workflow that I can automate and update into our general ledger. You'll notice it's a small amount of accounts. That's just for the sake of this demonstration and because we only want to look at some of our daily operating results. All right, let's dive in. So the very first step we want to do is this data prep and blend. So I'm going to bring in from my in and out tool tab here, which tells me I can bring data in and out with these tools, an input data tool, and drag it onto my canvas, this white space being my canvas. And in here, I can actually go and find all the different file types, whether it's a local file, and I can find anything from text files and CSVs, access databases, Excel, maybe even going into zipped files. But I can also look at other sorts of files. I can grab from SQL, Oracle, Hadoop, any sort of database that has an ODBC connection or OLEDB, and I can even save these connections out. Now, as I've shown already, I already have some facts and dimensions I want to pull from, and they're all on my local SQL Server instance. And I actually have it saved right here to make it really easy. So I go ahead and pull that local saved instance in, and I can see all the different tables that are available in my SQL Server. So first things first, I want to grab my fact order table. And what's really nice about this is I can actually see what I'm about to pull into my workflow by clicking this refresh button. And I haven't started my workflow yet. There's been nothing that's been pulled into memory on my machine, but I'm able to get a quick glimpse into what I'm going to be taking in and automating. So now that I have my fact orders, I want to do the same thing and pull in some of my DIM products so I can get some product information for my orders. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and go back to that saved local connection and pull in DIM product. And now I can again see with this refresh, here are all the different product IDs as well as their name, their manufacturer, and some categories that I can use for my products. All right, so we pulled in two of our different sources, and now we want to join them together. Now, if you're used to Excel, this is something that you would do with VLOOKUP, and we can do this very easily with Alteryx by using this join tool. So I can go to this join category and find my join tool and pull this in. When I've connected both of these two inputs into the left and right input respectively on the join tool, I can then choose what fields I want to join on. And very easily, when I select one and the exact same name is in my other source, it'll actually auto-populate the right-hand side. And then it shows me what my output is expected to look like in terms of the headers on all the different fields. And in this case, it alerts me and lets me know, hey, you actually have a duplicate header here with product ID. So I can deselect that and bring in all of my different product attributes. Now I'll show you one of the beautiful parts of Alteryx, which is its runtime environment. So if I ever want to see what would happen at the end of this workflow, I can click this green play button up at the top. And then I can see that it pulled in this information into memory, and then it performed a join operation. And it shows me the results here at the end of this tool, so I can see what would it look like for these two different sources to be joined together. What you'll notice is this isn't outputted anywhere. So this is, you can think of it as a playground because you're just pulling this in, testing things, maybe even performing some analysis, but you haven't outputted it to anything, so it's never going to overwrite these sources. So you never have to worry about you changing your source data until you put some output tools on here, which we'll get to eventually. Okay, great. So I have my order information as well as my product information. And one thing I know I'm going to have to deal with later on is anything to do with returns. And I can see here that there's a flag if something's returned. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that information in too. So for that, I'm going to go to my in-out tool again, or in-out category, and bring in another input data tool. Now, this was not in my SQL server, but this was actually a local file. So I can actually find it right here. It's my returns Excel spreadsheet. Oop, and it's just letting me know that I have it up. So I'm showing it to you guys. And I can pull in this sheet and once again see a quick view into what my return CSV or Excel looks like. And so one thing I notice here is I have an order ID, a product ID, an order product ID. So I'm going to join on this order product ID because it occurs in both different data sources. So as you can see here, the order product ID is actually a little farther down. So let's go ahead and join it. So I'm going to take another join tool, join to my returns, and I'm going to find order product ID, and it's going to automatically find it from my returns information. And what I want to do is, again, it sees I have duplicate field names in here. I'm going to, again, deselect all of these. Now, if I was to run this, one thing you're going to notice about these join tools that's really nifty is that it shows me everything that's a join between them, and it also will show me if there are records that are unjoined. So this is really easy if you want to find exceptions or if your data might have poor quality, is that whenever you're doing joins, unlike SQL or in Excel, it'll just tell you what the result set is, but you always have to know what are some of the exceptions that I have to watch out for or gotchas. So if I was to only use the output of what came in the join, I would be missing out on 9,000 records of orders. So in order to take that into account, I'm going to bring in what's called a union tool and bring in both the left side and the join. So that way I get all the orders that had a return as well as orders that didn't have any returns. So now if I click run, I'm going to see that I have 9,994 records, just like I did before. All right, we're doing good. So we've done some data prep and blending here, and I'm going to add in one more piece here so that we can better calculate our return analysis. And in that, I want to find out in dollars how much I need to reimburse my customers for returns. So what we'll see in our data set here is that I have a return ID, the quantity that was returned, and the reason for the return, as well as the date. But this quantity doesn't necessarily mean that's the total quantity that customer purchased. So, for instance, this customer purchased 7 items, but they only returned 1 of them. So I need to calculate the cost of that return. Now to do that, it's really simple. I'm actually going to use this tool in Alteryx called the formula tool, and this allows me to create a custom formula, just like you would in Excel, to calculate this return cost per item and then a total return cost. So I can, in this top piece, say add column and say return cost per item is this new column I want to create. And what I get to do with this tool is I can select from some of the existing columns that exist in my data set. So in this case, I'm going to go down to extended sales. This just meaning the sales plus the tax amount. And I'm going to divide that by the quantity of items that the customer purchased. So I'm going to go ahead and find quantity. And it gives me a quick little preview in this window, which is super nice because then I can see if this is reasonable. So next, what I want to do is actually set the data type on this. So you notice it's auto-select everything to a string, and I'm going to actually make this into a fixed decimal and make it size. And actually, in this case, I'm going to leave it as a double, which is just a more accurate term of looking at return cost per item. Next, I want to actually find out now in dollars how much I need to return to the customer. So to do this, I'm going to create another new field and call this total return cost. And with this guy, I'm actually going to use the column that I just created, and I can actually use IntelliSense within Alteryx to do this. So I can type in return cost per item, and it'll actually populate for me some suggested column names that I can use. So I'm going to pull in that value, and you can notice it's the same so far. And then what I'm going to multiply that by is my return quantity. Now, it gives me null. That's just because it just needs to calculate this. But I'm going to go ahead and make this a double as well. Now we're going to go ahead and run this. And we can see on the far right side that is now calculated a return cost per item, and then for every item that was returned, a total return cost. All right. So we've prepped our data and we blended it. We've created a little bit of some calculations. And now we have to get to the part which is that daily portion of the general ledger. So in order to calculate what I've done on a daily basis, I'm going to be looking at what happened yesterday, because I can't be able to see the real time today because I might be posting multiple times a day. So I just want to do it once. And in order to do that, I'm going to actually bring in a filter tool, allowing me to create a subset of my data. And I'm going to ask for any time I have an order date that is equal to yesterday. So this is super nice about Alteryx. It gives me an easy way for me to perform this and just say that I will dynamically calculate what yesterday is. And when I click run, sure enough, I get a number of records that had occurred yesterday. And you'll notice that it actually can take into account any sort of time of day. It's just saying any time between midnight and 11:59 that day. All right, so we have our daily information, and we have our sales, our returns, our shipping information is in here, but we don't have our tenders yet. And so to find tenders, I'm actually going to bring in some other inputs here. So similarly, and because we've done this before, I'm going to go a little faster. I'm going to go to our database, and in this case, I'm going to bring in fact payment, which has payment information, tender ID, and the amount the customer paid per each tender. And I'm going to bring in my dimension for tender. And I'm going to quickly join these two together so that now we can see per each order how a customer is paid for it. So I'm going to join on tender ID, remove duplicate names, and then I'm going to do the same thing that I did earlier, and I'm going to ensure that I'm only looking at transactions that occurred yesterday. So I'm going to look when my order date is equal to yesterday. Click run, and sure enough, here's all the different tenders that have occurred. All right, so we've completed our first step of data prep and blend, which what we have found is taking the most amount of time for anybody who is doing accounting automation to perform. Now we get into the fun part and the reason why you guys are accountants, and that's all the business logic. So to do this piece, what we want to know is what's the eventual general ledger going to look like. So like I showed earlier, we know that we're going to have the different account numbers as well as a description for it, some debits and credits, as well as a date, batch ID, and journal entry type. Now, to create these different accounts using Alteryx, I just need to know how I can section off and summarize my data to fit in these different accounts. So what I want to do is have a mapping of sorts that's going to take all my information from here, being raw information, to this general ledger. And to do that, I'm going to utilize this input called a journal entry input accounts. And what this does, it just does a mapping for me of names, so that way I know that when I create something in Alteryx that has a name of return bought wrong item, that I can actually rename the account to what my business standard is. So let's go ahead and start to do this. Now, the first thing I'm going to go into is actually going to be shipping. So we're going to be looking at these sets of accounts. So what I'm going to want to do is the first thing is take my raw information right here, and I want to aggregate it by each individual shipping mode. And then I want to sum up from that the total shipping cost. I'm going to leave it and rename it within this tool as shipping cost. This tool right here is the same thing as doing subtotaling if you're in Excel. So what we can see here is per each shipping mode, I have the total cost that we spent yesterday. Now, in order to get it to adhere to this account description, what I'm going to do is really easily take our trusty friend, the formula tool, and I'm going to create a new field called name, and I'm going to just custom name this so that way it's going to join to these accounts. So if we notice here, the account for shipping is going to be shipping dash same day, shipping dash first class, standard. So I need to add shipping in front of the shipping mode to create this. So to do that really easily in this tool, I can actually create custom text fields. And so I'll indicate with an apostrophe that I want to do text, much like Excel. And I'll say shipping dash, and then add in the ship mode. So sure enough, it looks exactly how we'd expect it to. And I'm going to change the name here so that way, or the length of this field, so it's 100. So now I can see, sure enough, my name is going to match exactly what the name is for my account over here. So then the only thing left for me to do is associate my shipping, whether this is a debit or a credit. In this case, we're looking at debit. Great. So my output here is a debit amount as well as a name that we're going to be joining to our general ledger. So now let's do the opposite, because as we all know, every general ledger needs to be balanced. And so we need to be able to credit the information that we have to pay to our shippers. And so in this, I'm just going to use a summarize tool again and go ahead and sum up our shipping cost. In this case, I'm just going to call it credit. And from there, I'm going to again take a formula tool, make a new field called name, and in here, I'm just going to call it credit card payable and give it a length of 100. So go ahead and run this. And we can see I have the same sort of schema where I have a name field and a credit field, or name and a debit that I can eventually join. So let's go ahead and show how this will join it in while we do a subset, and then we can continue doing the rest of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to union in all of these two different fields, so now they're going to be in the same data set, and I'm going to want to join them together to this journal entry. And from here, I'm going to join my name field to my account description reference. So what we can see here is that, sure enough, I have all the different account numbers now associated with all the different account business logic that I've created, as well as it lets me know that, hey, you have 13 other records that you haven't accounted for yet in your account business logic. So now that we're able to associate our account as well as a debit and a credit for every single one of our account names, let's go ahead and finish out the rest of them. So the next one we're going to want to do is actually in the returns category. So for returns, we handle it a little bit differently. We take in this formula tool, and we're going to pull in, and this is a really cool nifty part about Alteryx, is that I can actually pull in two separate lines from the same output fields here, meaning I can reference this value and this data set as many times as I want to when I'm creating my business logic. No longer are you having to go through one stream and like duplicate a bunch of your code, but you can just reference things as easily as you can in Excel. And what I want to do here is similarly as what I did before, I want to ensure I only pull in returns that happened yesterday. So from this I can look, and I can see there are 27 returns from yesterday. So for this guy, we're going to do something very similar to what we did with shipping. We're going to pull in another one of these summarize tools, and you're going to notice this is the theme of having this business logic for GL accounting, is that I'm going to be using a summarize tool and a formula tool in order to calculate and format the information so it can be joined to an account. So I'm going to go down to my return reason, and I want to sum up the total return cost. And in this case, I'm also going to call it a debit. And I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like. And so you can see per each return reason, so if someone purchased the wrong item, the item was defective, they found a better deal elsewhere, or any of the following ones, I can find the total amount that we have to give out, or what we're going to be accepting, and then I'm going to show what we have to give out into our credit account. All right, so doing the same thing again, we're going to go ahead, take our formula tool, create a new column called name, and then using the magic of text editing here, say return dash plus our return reason. So sure enough, you can see a preview of it. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, but I want to calculate in cash or credit where it's going to be coming out of. And the reason we're looking at cash is because these returns have occurred after we've already completed the transaction. So now we have to give out from our cash stores in order to give this return amount. So I'm going to go down to total return cost, sum it up, and bring in a name, and we're just going to call this cash. Great, so let's go ahead and check this out. If I run all of this and compare it to the accounts that I have, sure enough, I'm seeing cash is joining as well as all my return amounts. So we're doing good. Now, to make this a little bit faster, I'm going to go through the next two a little more quickly because I think you guys got the picture of how we go about making our different accounts. But I'm going to look at how do we bring our sales information in as well as our tender information. And the important part about these two is that these need to balance. And I'm going to show you a little bit later what it takes for us to do a variance test on what the balancing act is between what we're getting from our tenders as well as the point of sale system. So let's go ahead and calculate our sales really quickly. So I'm going to pull from the same sources I have up here. And what I want to look at my sales as is I want to look at them from the perspective of the sales categories that I have. And from there, I'm going to bring in my extended sales as well as my shipping costs because this is what I accepted from my customer. So I bring in both of these. I'm going to click run so we can see what it looks like. And sure enough, I can see per each of our different categories for our products, we have different sales and shipping costs. Now, I need to combine these two so I can see how much I've accepted from the customer. So I'm going to use, again, our formula tool to do that. So in this case, I'm going to call this credit because it's sales. And what I'm going to do is look for my extended sales plus my shipping cost. And then I'm going to, again, change this so that it's going to be a double. So now what we can see here is, sure enough, our sales and the total amount credited. All right, we're almost there. As you guys know, the portion that you go through business logic is probably one of the most important, but can sometimes be the most tedious. So the last piece we do is tender information. And oh, actually, one thing I forgot here is I just need to put into here the same thing we did earlier with name. And I'm going to say it is sales plus my category. So I see sales furniture. All right, so now let's get to tender information. So I'm going to go ahead and pull from a data source that we made earlier, being tenders. And what I want to do is per each tender type, the total amount that we have that we accepted from our customers. So I'm going to group on tender type, or create a subtotal based on my tender type, and sum my amount. And I'm going to call this debit. So from there, if I run this, sure enough, I see American Express, gift cards, MasterCard, Visas, and the total amount I've accepted. And what I'm going to do, bring in a formula tool and add in our trustee name field and call it tender dash tender type, giving us exactly what we need for our account. All right, so we are now done with our business logic. And what we're going to do is connect this back up to our union tool, run the workflow, And see, sure enough, I have 18 records that have been joined. So that means that I have no records lost on this side, nor the side for my journal entry input. So I know I'm done and ready to go for our next piece. And that is formatting for a GL, because we need to get it to look much like this, as well as checking a variance in order to see if the tender and sales actually balance. So first things first, what I'm going to be looking at here is I want to be looking at how to configure my GL to look exactly like the output. Now, to do that, I need to add in 3 new fields: date, batch ID, and journal entry type. So after this tool, I'm going to go ahead, put in a formula tool, and I'm going to first create a date column. Now, I need this date to be yesterday's date. So I'll show you some cool functions in Alteryx that allows you to play with dates and format them. So if you ever want to look at functions that Alteryx has, you can click on this FX tool, much like what you'd see in Excel, and you can see different types of functions that are available. So there's date time types or functions. There's even math functions in here. You can be doing things with spatial or strings. So if you're doing anything with like replacements, or if you want to do left or right to get certain parts of a string, all that's available within Alteryx. But in my case, what I want to be doing is just adding dates, or adding, I want to take away one day from today's date. So I use this formula called date time add, and it gives me a quick formatting so I know how to use the tool for the formula. So it first tells me, hey, what date do you want me to augment? And in this case, I'm going to use something within Alteryx called date time today, and this gives me whatever today's date is. Then it asks me for how much do you want to change this date by. So I'm going to say by -1, and they're like, and -1 what? What units? So I'm going to put in days. So sure enough, now I can see in my preview, this is yesterday's date. And what I want to do is, as always, configure my data type to actually show what I hope for it to be performed as, and that's a date. So now when I run, I can go ahead and go to the end of my workflow, and I can see there's yesterday's date. So now I'm able to actually have that same date field that we find here. Notice this is an example. I'm running yesterday's date, not the 17th. All right, we're almost there. So next, we have to bring in that batch ID. So for this guy, I'm going to go ahead and create a new batch ID field. And now, if we're to look at a batch ID from our example set, we'll notice that it appears to be yesterday's date followed by a -CO. So I want to make the same sort of field where I start with the month, then the day, then the year. So the great part is I can do that in Alteryx. So what I'm going to do is I need to format this date that you see above to be start with a month, then the day, then the year. So to do that, what I'm going to do is a function called dateTimeFormat. Say I want to use the date field that I actually created above. So it's very nifty. I can actually use fields from earlier in my result set that I can then use in subsequent ones because it executes in making this one by one. So I have date, and then it says, hey, how would you like to format your date? And so for this, I'm going to say, using some of the syntax that Alteryx has, is a month, a day, and a year. And put this at the end. So there, sure enough, I have month, day, year. Then I'm going to add in that text like we've been able to do before and say -CO, just meaning company. So great, I've now created my batch ID field. I'm going to make this only a string of 100. And then the last thing I need to do is create journal entry type. And that's right here, and it just needs to be standard, saying this is how we do a standard upload. And I'm going to make a new one called JE_type and just type in standard. All right, so if I run this, and I was able to run that by using a hotkey called Control-R, so I didn't have to go and click the play button every time. Now, we actually have our date, our batch ID, as well as our type. So we've done the formatting portion. Now, let's do a variance test. So the first thing we want to do in our variance test is just check if our debits and our credits balance. So to do that, I'm going to use this summarize tool right here, and I'm just going to sum up all of our debits and credits. Then I'm going to use this formula tool, and in this, I'm just going to make a field called variance, and it's going to be my debits minus my credits. And I'm going to make this output a float or a double. Great. So sure enough, they balance. My variance is actually equal to 0. So we're in good hands right now. That means that everything that happened in our business logic and in our two systems, one being the payment side and one being the point of sale side, are actually balanced. So great, but what I want to do is I want to account for any time that it actually doesn't balance. So to do that, I actually need to add this information to my data set. So to do that, I'm actually going to use a new tool here called this append fields. And what this does is it basically just says, hey, I want to add a certain column to my data set, and so I just want to add this variance column there. So now when I click run, sure enough, I have my variance at the very end. You'll notice it gives us, this is a really cool part of Alteryx, it gives you a flag saying there might be some discrepancies, and in this case it's saying this is being rounded. If you look at the actual value here, it actually shows like the minute of changes, and that's just because we're using doubles throughout this workflow. So it's easy enough that we can actually just change this to a fixed decimal. And then when I rerun this, it'll say my variance is actually 0 and not have that warning for me. All right, so let's make this output. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to filter, and I want to make sure that I'm only going to be giving a valid output if I have a variance of 0. So I use a filter tool again. I go find the variance field, and I say as long as it's equal to 0, I want to have all my records come out of this top piece. Then, trying to find my mouse. I just want to very simply make sure that my two fields, my data set that I have working with here, matches this data set over here. So I'm going to want batch ID first, then date, account description, debit, credit, reference, and JE type. So I'm going to do getting rid of all these different fields and capitalize them with this select tool. So it allows me to rename my fields to a completely different name, or I can just name them as I see fit. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all these extra fields here, leave account and account description, leave reference, date, batch ID, and JE type. And I'm going to get rid of variance. And now I'm going to order these fields just like what I had in my output. So to do that, I'm going to use this batch ID, and I can either use these up and down arrows to move into the front or the back, or what I can do is actually right-click and drag it. So it allows you to really easily configure your data set just like what you need, especially if your systems that you're integrating with are very particular about the schema. So now this appears to be correct. So if I click run one more time here, I can see batch ID, date, account, description, debit, credit, reference, JE type, great. But I also see that there's some rounding here that I need to do, just making sure it gets down to being cents. So to do that, I can just change this to be a fixed decimal and just say, give me a total of 10 digits with 2 of them being behind the decimal. So this select tool is actually really powerful in order for you to do any sort of your formatting, renaming, or reaugmentation of the schema. All right, now the last thing I want to do is create an output. And here, I'm going to use this output data tool, what I mentioned at the very beginning of the call. As soon as you put one of these on the canvas, now you have to worry about overriding things that you could be using earlier, because you can put this output anywhere on your machine or into a database. So we can do it in similar files, and you can see we can use Excel, we can use an Alteryx database, which is their own proprietary way of storing information in a column or storage database. You can even put it into a Tableau Hyper file or data extract, or even into an access table. So in our case, we just want to leave this into Excel, and what I want to call this is My journal entry, if I can spell journal entry output, general ledger, daily reconciliation, general ledger, and click save, and just call it JE input. Now it gives me some configuration options saying, do you want to create a new sheet, overwrite a sheet, append to a sheet, overwrite the entire file? For me, I just want to overwrite my specific sheet. So now, when I click run, it's going to go ahead, create this journal entry output for me, and it actually even shows me in this log what happened in the workflow, including that it outputted data to a certain Excel spreadsheet. I can then click on it, and sure enough, open it in Excel, and we can see there it is, my journal entry output that I'm going to be using and outputting into either one, a system that you can actually pick up Excel files, which we have seen in the past, or you can even output this directly with a database. All right, so the very last piece is what happens if the variance actually doesn't equal 0, and instead it is 1? How do I handle that? So what we're going to do is actually use an email output. So in this, I'm going to use a tool here called email. And this allows me within the tool of Alteryx to be able to send emails out to myself or any stakeholders if anything occurs, or if I just want to send an Excel spreadsheet or certain files. So I'll easily configure this. And I'm just going to send this to myself. I'm going to say it's from reporting at Decisive Data. Oops. And then I can say for my subject, general ledger variance. And then I get to choose a file that I might want to add to prove I have a variance. And I can even put something in my body of this saying something along the lines of check attached file for variance. So in order to use this guy, what I want to do is first create a file that would be used if there was a variance. So if that's the case, I'm going to create another output data tool, and I'm going to put it at the false side of this filter tool because it's always going to take in files or different records that had a variance greater than 0. So what I'm going to call this super simply is just unbalanced entries. And now as a way to test it, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to, on my variance column here, I'm just going to alias it as being 0.01. So now when I click run, it says, hey, I'm not going to actually build that general ledger reconciliation. Instead, I'm actually going to bring it out to unbalanced entries. And now what I want to do is make sure it overwrites, is I want this email to send this. And to do that, all I want to do is have it send this attachment so I can go find that attachment actually on my machine and find unbalanced entries, click open, and let's go ahead and try sending it. So I'm going to attach in this information so it knows what information to send, and it will send an email for every single record that comes through. So in this case, it'd be sending me 18 records, which is not good. I just want it to send 1. So I'm going to use a sample tool, which just allows me to take a sample of the different records that are coming into a tool and set it to 1. So now I'm only going to get 1 record. I click run, and boom, it sent off an email. Now, this is similar to an email that you can get from this sort of Alteryx reporting. And you can see right here, sure enough, it actually showed up. And I can see an email sent to me with general ledger variance with an unbalanced entries attached to it. So now, if there's ever an issue that occurs when I'm doing this automation steps, I can actually find what occurred and what are the different files that had unbalanced entries. A super powerful portion of this tool. All right, so I want to leave some time for question and answers, but one thing I do want to show you, because I know as accountants, you always have to be performing reconciliations. I want to show you a quick tool here at Decisive Data that we have used for reconciliation and takes about 1 minute. And it could be something that you use and anytime you're checking maybe general ledger outputs or it could be different like return information or anything where you're comparing one similar file to another one, maybe a day off or 2 days off, where you want to ensure that values are the same. So in this case, I'm going to bring in an input data tool and pull in, and I'm going to find the actual file I want to look for. I'm going to find one of our daily reconciliations from the 17th of this month, and I want to bring in another one, and this is our original, and I want to find what are the differences between these two different inputs. And to do that, all I'm going to do is use a cool nifty tool that we've made here at Decisive Data called the Data Compare tool. And what this allows me to do is investigate the differences. So I pick what fields from each of these to find a unique row, and then the two different fields that I think could be different. And I can create output. So when I run these together, it can show me that there are two different rows that have different values for the ones I specified. There's one row from this entry that is actually shows up that this one doesn't have. And there are 15 that match exactly the same. And if I want to find out exactly what columns have been changed, I can use another tool called the Column Compare tool. And this is going to say, for those two rows that I have that are no longer the same or don't have the same values, these are what has changed. The credit values have changed, as well as the debit values. And you can see the before and after. All right. So I know that was a lot of content, but I definitely want to open it up to some question and answers. So Scott, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you for taking us through building of this workflow here. This is very impressive in terms of just a showcase of the power within Alteryx in terms of automating a daily process there. So one thing I did want to share, I'll go back to my presentation here, wanted to make sure that if folks wanted to get connected with Decisive Data, that we give you some good contact information. If you like what you've seen today, and you have questions, if you want to get in touch with Decisive Data, as a premier partner of Alteryx, they do have a complete support and enablement strategy built for new Alteryx users. And even for those of you who may have been active with Alteryx before, if you need some assistance with connecting with different data sources, building new types of workflows, have questions about going into some of the advanced analytics side of the platform, this is where to contact Michael Stead and Decisive Data here. Just a simple info@decisivedata.net. Their phone number is also shown there on the screen as well.